This is the Skin Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Thomas Hitchcock, and here we'll investigate everything skin science and dissect it from a scientific perspective, analyze it from a medical perspective, critique it from a consumer perspective, and give insight from an industry perspective. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I am Dr. Thomas Hitchcock, and with me in the studio, I have the lovely Angela Wilson McDonald. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Thomas. Great to see you. Great to be back here.
Oh,
it's been a while.
Have you, I guess. Yes, it has. It seems like it's been a while.
It's been a while. We've been busy this year. We've been very busy this year.
I'm tired. I'm always tired.
Speak of
that. And then also the lovely Dr. Brian Jones. I can't be sexist here. I got to also say the same thing.
Some might say even lovelier.
Okay, all right. Glad to be back.
And so, just interestingly, the other day I was looking through kind of the podcasts that, who's been watching and stuff like that. And I noticed that one of our podcasts had like 19,000 views, and it was one with Dr. Jones.
Well, there you have it.
And so,
he's
obviously, he's
See,
the influencer
Brian
here.
Jones of the Stones. I forgot that he didn't die, or he died 50, 60 years ago. So that's the reason.
Well, regardless,
So
we're going
big expectations on this podcast, Brian.
Right.
We're glad you're here.
Okay, well, we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, but anyway, also, we wanted to talk about a topic today that I thought was good for kind of like a family discussion versus bringing somebody else in, because I think it's one of those things where we've dealt with it for quite a while.
Yeah.
We've been doing microneedling or selling microneedling devices and doing microneedling studies and such since 2013. So it's been
over
11
10 years?
Yeah. And so we know a thing or two about what's been done, what's been complained about. We're at the level of where we can actually see the complaints that come through and stuff. And so we wanted to kind of get into that. But before we do, as always, I like to show a puzzle before we start the discussion. This is one that I got. This is actually a 3D printed puzzle that's actually a copy of a wood puzzle that's made by a guy named Juno in Australia. And they're very sought after puzzles. He makes very few of them. So they made the 3D printed one because a lot of us that wanted to solve it couldn't get our hands on it or didn't want to pay thousands of dollars for a collector's item. So this one is really kind of cool. It's very simple, but it's one of those ones that is more than meets the eye. So I don't think you can necessarily grab one of these. They're not sold retail wise, but you could probably grab one of these on an auction site or something. Pretty cool. It's called the Sequential Discovery Bird Box, I believe. All right.
Interesting. Okay.
All right. So let's get into the topic at hand. So there's something that's kind of bubbled up recently that's persisted over the years, and it's not something that's been a huge problem per se. It's just that something that people have said and reacted to, and we've kind of had to try to squish it down because it's not completely accurate. But the fact is that it is based on kind of presuppositions that have perpetuated for the last 50 years in dermatology. And so we can't really blame, because it's something that's kind of at least
continues to persist. Yeah.
But given the recent data that we've started to learn more about the actual the microbiome of the skin, how it functions, whether or not things like C. acnes are actually contagious or pathogenic in nature, we now know a lot more about what happens when you do microneedling. And is the skin truly sterile, even if you do alcohol wipes or betadine or whatever, and what are the implications to all that? And so I thought this is kind of going to be a little touchy, because everybody has their opinions, right? What we want to do is not give opinions necessarily, maybe a few here and there. We'll sprinkle some in there. But we want to really look into the scientific literature and in the science and say, where does this come from? This sentiment we're going to talk about. And, what does the literature say? Has it been studied? What have the studies told us? And then we'll let the overall conclusion be that of the listener. And, I don't necessarily want to give them any conclusion, but we'll give our kind of outline of the science and then let them go from there.
Well, I love that, because what we've always said to customers over the last decade was, it's our job to come in and provide the science. We don't operate in the anecdotal. We're an FDA-governed company. So what does the science say? We're going to educate you on what the science says, and then we're going to turn it over to you to make educated decisions on how you proceed with the patient. So
absolutely,
I think this is one of those opportunities we have just to stick to the science. What does it reveal? And then allow practitioners to make their decisions on where they go from here. So
yes.
I'm excited about this topic.
Yes, I am too. And so, Angela, why don't you tell the audience what the topic is?
The topic is microneedling and acne. So we're going to start, as you mentioned before, there seems to be persisting in the market this confusion on what is actually defined as active acne or even acne prone. So I think we want to start by looking at an example of something that was revealed recently in social media regarding a patient that had experienced a microneedling procedure and what happened thereafter. So should we go to that?
All right. So this beautiful young lady, she was very brave to go on to share her story because she basically wanted to warn people that things can go wrong. And we all know that. In medicine, there's always a risk and a benefit ratio that you kind of have to weigh. But let's look at what she shows here. So as you can see, she's an acne-prone individual. You can see some of that in her skin texture that she probably does fight with this a little bit, but she's, in my opinion, has beautiful skin. So go ahead and keep the video going, and I want to show the progression here. So this is right after a microneedling treatment, not anything untoward. Okay, so this is 1 month after. Okay, can we pause it here? Pause it at the 1 month after first. So this is something I want to make sure that we're keeping in mind. This is 1 month after tiny bumps started to appear. Now, what I want to say, keep that in mind. It's 1 month after that the condition that she's claiming happened started. Okay, keep going. Right, this is 3 months after. As you can see, there's a rash here that she's claiming is forming, and it does look, it does have an acneiform appearance, but we'll talk about that in a second.
But interesting, she's defining it as a rash and saying that it's itching and burning 24/7.
Correct.
Which gives you some clues on what this may actually be, correct?
Correct. It is true. She's giving us clues of what it should be. Okay, there's more. There's one more, I think, image that she shows, or a couple more. Here's 11 months after. Okay, and then, okay, stop here. This is where I really want to show, because when you look at this, it's almost a little bit shocking, right? Because
of course.
You don't typically see cystic acne that looks like that. And so there are some pustular lesions towards her chin, but the rest of them, I want to look at those and then actually talk about what those are. But before we get into that, I think we should get into defining kind of what are these disease states, what causes these disease states, and then what is happening to this young lady, and what people that responded to her video, what were they saying, or some of them, what were they saying it was, and what do we have science or medicine publications that could actually drive us in a direction. Now, one thing that I do want to say as a caveat here is that we're not making any diagnosis on this young lady. We don't have her medical history. We can only go based off of the video that she showed us, as anybody can other than the person that treated her. That being said, what we can do is look at the manifestations and give opinions and look at histology and such and morphology of disease states and see whether they match.
Very good.
Okay.
Well, let's get started then, because when we looked at that first picture, Thomas, you said, okay, this is clearly an acne-prone patient. So what were you seeing in that case? What defines actually someone who's acne-prone?
I want to let Brian Jones start on that conversation.
Very nice.
Well, again, you can see that she had some modeling of the skin, so unevenness in the cheek area along the jawline. There were some red papules that were there. So again, as well as some what looked to be, she had makeup on, it looked like, so it was a little tough to pick up some of it. But again, I think that there was, you could see pimples essentially in her skin. So again, that would put her as an acne-prone individual, and then, where she had lesions as being active acne. But again, she
was pretty clear.
Again, certainly within the age range. Again, female is towards hormonal influences that occur with acne. So again, all that comes into play as towards being an acne-prone individual.
Right. And Jose, on the video, the first image where she looked like she had makeup on, was that the day before, or was that just before at some vague time?
It doesn't say.
Okay.
I pulled it back up if you want me to.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, I don't think it's hit on the first picture. Where
I guess I'm just trying to drive at, because when you look at her day of microneedling, you can see certain areas that look a little more red and which is telltale of if you microneedle over a pimple, you can get a little bit more of that because it's raised. So therefore, you're going to get kind of an abrasive type of puncture there. And so I've seen that before. We used to talk about this when we talked about treating acne scars. And how around acne scars, sometimes people try to get down into it, but then there's the raised tissue around it. And a lot of times you see abrasion on like a little halo. So that's kind of what it looked like to me on the image. That being said, with acne-prone individuals, I think one of the misconceptions, I'm going to say that.
We're choosing our words very carefully today.
We're not trying to insult anybody here. We're just trying to have a discussion about what are we observing, because kind of what the talking point has been over the years is that if you treat somebody with acne, say a pimple, and you treat over the pimple, let's say even just one, and you take microneedling and then you just keep treating the person and you've treated over the pimple, the claim has been that you then can drag the bacteria from the pimple and cause more acne on the skin.
Not even just the fact of doing it in microneedling, but actually just popping pimples and everything else. So it goes
true.
back even before microneedling.
That's true.
So it goes way, way, way back. And
that's true. And actually, interestingly, we can discuss why somebody who pops a pimple, why that's not a good idea necessarily. And I do think you should leave them alone if you can. But that being said, there is that kind of talking point out there that you can spread.
It's persisted
acne
for as long as we've been in the microneedling field. I do want to say too that I think it's important to point out, while we showed you a microneedling patient that was highlighted in social media, we did contact that person. That person was not using the device that's associated with our company. That was not the device nor the products that were used in this case. I think that's worth noting.
It's worth noting, but I don't think it's pertinent, because you can have adverse events with whatever medical device you use, right? It's not. I don't believe that the device that was used was the culprit here, and we'll talk about that. There are some differences between devices that we can talk about a little bit later that do matter significantly as far as safety and potential risk. But really, at this point, I really want to focus on: can you truly spread acne? Is that a thing? What do we see in the medical literature? Is it possible? Is it probable? And so part of the reason why that was perpetuated, and I'm going to let you guys tell me if I'm wrong, is because most of what people assumed caused acne, and still to this day do, is they believe that there's one species of bacteria called C. acnes that causes acne. So if you get that bacteria in another follicle, it's going to cause acne there. And so that, I think, is what drives that. Now, you guys tell me if I'm wrong and if there's other things that you think are driving it.
The very first podcast when Jim Leydon was on the call.
Yep.
So again, and he brought up the fact that, again, acne's been looked at for 70 plus years. It's probably the most looked at in regard to a disease state and trying to figure out what the cause is. And he still says he doesn't know all the facts that come into play, or no one knows exactly after all this years. So again, there's a lot of influences, a lot of different things going into play. And again, that's where also he mentioned the fact, I think, as I recall, is that Albert Kligman made a comment regarding the bacteria, and all of a sudden, Albert being the influencer he was at the time, and how it could be, it certainly took off that's actually, why, acne is why acne. And I think he mentioned it that in that podcast that's not what Albert meant.
Right.
And
if we have that clip, if we can find that clip, I wouldn't mind if we played that now so people could hear.
Okay.
The idea that the organism then called P. acnes is sort of like the artist formerly known as Prince was absolutely essential for acne. And what we showed in that paper with Bob Lafker and I showed was that that if you looked at the earliest lesions of acne in children that come at adrenarche or right at the beginning of puberty, which are almost always non-inflammatory, as Ann Lucky showed very nicely years ago, and mostly in the midline. If you look in those follicles, there are no P. acnes, C. acnes, whatever you want to call it. So we thought that was important because a lot of people, not us, but but a lot of people thought that the organism was absolutely essential, and that it was basically a bacterial disease. And Ruth Frankel, who I mentioned, who was involved with the early studies with Strauss and Poche on the free fatty acid story, was then the editor of the Journal of Investigative Dermatology. And so I sent the paper to Ruth, and she wrote back. She said, "This can't be true. This just can't be true." And I said, "Well, that's what that's not a good answer. You have to say that what we did. You have to find something wrong with our methods and or whatever. You can't say I don't like the story."
Exactly.
You know?
Well, that's
so we could not get it. We ended up publishing that, I think, in a journal of ultrastructure, some crazy journal. It had nothing to do with dermatology.
Yeah.
But because we did EM.
No, it was JID. You published it in JID, Journal of Investigative Dermatology.
Yeah, but the first page, you have to look in the references. The real seminal paper was in the Journal of Ultrastructural something or other.
Okay.
But
that's wild. That is so
nobody
totally wild.
Nobody would listen to us that we said, we said it was not essential. It plays an important role once it gets there in high enough numbers, but it was not essential for the formation of abnormal sebaceous follicles that could lead to what we call acne.
That I agree with you. And that was very enlightening to me for when the guy that actually was kind of responsible for the whole idea of C. acnes being associated with acne basically said to us, I never said it caused acne. I said that might be found there because that's where that microbe it lives. Mm-hmm. And it really tickles me because he even talked about how it took him a long time to even publish that because nobody wanted to publish that. Yeah. And then it became dogma, even though he said, I never said that. And so that's where, for me, it's almost comical in the sense that it's perpetuated when that was never the intent. And we've done, I think, a couple podcasts on C. acnes. We've written papers and books and stuff on this. So I won't belabor this. But the fact is, when you look at a lot of the research in the medical literature over the last, 70 years,
at least.
Yeah.
Going back way into the 50s, early 60s, there was quite a bit of work that was done and all the way since then. So.
Yeah, and a lot of that research, if you look at the strains used, there's like 2 or 3 maybe. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, it's strains like 6919. And that's just a designation for a certain strain. But that is actually one of the strains of the subspecies C. acnes, which is associated more with pathogenicity versus the ones that aren't. A lot of the conclusions that were made were not studying health-associated strains of C. acnes. And now, why is this important? This is important because one of the things that I would like to ask those listening, as well as you guys, is if you can spread a bacteria on the skin, that being C. acnes, which I think is what most people are talking about, but we can talk about whether it's another microbe. If you can spread that, then what about the fact that we now know as a fact that every follicle on our face contains C. acnes, and not only that, it has the majority of the microbes in the follicle as C. acnes. If that's the case, then why is it that we don't have acne in every follicle? Because,
as well as it's not transmissible between person to person.
Yeah, it's not a communicable disease.
Correct.
Like,
so
if you hug somebody, you don't get acne.
Right. So again, you would think that if it was that was the issue, then it would have been a case that it would have been able to be transferred. If it was
truly only bacteria, then the signs are not there.
Right.
What you just described. The signs aren't there to suggest that it's just a bacterial condition.
That you can spread it by popping a pimple and wiping it, or
Correct.
using microneedling and going over the face. So it's not like these bacteria are little seeds for pimples,
Right.
that you're planting on the face. I mean, that's where I think we need to start there. But let's talk about, okay, well, that's one caveat here. Is there anything else within a pimple, within an acneic lesion, that could be spread via this type of modality like microneedling? So when I think about the microbiome as a whole, there's also fungus, there's also phage and such. Now, one of the most prevalent fungi on the face is Malassezia a species of Malassezia. It's a genus. And Malassezia, actually, more and more literature is pointing towards that being more part of the process of acne than other microbes, possibly even. And so, of course, we're not making definitive statements here. We're just trying to say what is it in the literature that's driving kind of the current discussion on what causes acne and whether it is communicable.
Right.
Or
And certainly in the inflammatory sense
Right.
regarding that piece, yes.
Right. And so you bring up the key word there, which is inflammatory, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because acne is an inflammatory condition. But the real question is, what is driving the inflammation? Is it a genetic predisposition of the person? So is that person just primed for inflammation? Because we do know there's literature that shows that people that have acne can have lower instances of things like IL-10 in their blood. And there's research around that. Now, that's, again, it could be a chicken and egg thing. Like, it doesn't mean that, they just normally can't produce it. It's just they aren't for some reason producing it. Again, there's also literature that talks about how certain strains of C. acnes can actually affect the immune system to make it more inflammatory, or other strains can affect it to be quiescent or less inflammatory and protective in nature. And so it could be that being exposed to a certain pathogenic strain can cause a series of events, and that's why they are having these conditions. But that being said, those things which are important and part of the process, do they corroborate this idea that you can spread acne?
So to corroborate the idea that you could spread acne, you would have to know definitively what causes acne. And it doesn't sound that you just mentioned a lot of things that could be at play as to why someone's experiencing acne. But for it to be spreadable, there has to be something that's been identified that would be the pathogen that could be spread. And it doesn't sound like...
Actually, no, just kidding.
Yeah, actually. Boy, have I heard that term over the years.
Let me stop you real quick before you make your other point, because the thing is, I agree that that's a component, but I think actually what would be more of a telltale is if we actually saw evidence that you could spread acne by doing microneedling. Right. So if you saw clinical literature that described this person had a pimple, I microneedled them, and now they have pimples all over. That is really more important.
More important. Okay.
Then you say, well, this is why it happened. Because right now we're trying to disprove a negative in a way.
Right.
We're trying to say there's no evidence of it, and let's explain why there's no evidence of it, versus there's evidence of it, and let's explain why there's evidence of it.
Got it. Okay.
So I think that this is a good place where we can take a look at some of the evidence in the literature about why we don't think that this is the case.
Okay.
So, Brian, do you want to talk about, you mentioned a study earlier. Do you want to talk about that one regarding?
Which study was that?
I think it was a Iranian study.
Oh, yes. So there was a study that was done in Iran. Again, it was done at one of the hospitals there and published in an Iranian journal. But again, what they looked at was the, microneedling and looking to see whether or not there was any changes in regarding the number of lesions. Mm-hmm. And they also compared it against isotretinoin. And again, in their particular hands, in this particular group of, I think it was 40 individuals or 41 individuals between each of the groups, one group with the microneedling, one with the isotretinoin, they did not see an increase in lesion counts. There wasn't
in either group.
In either group. It wasn't a case that it was transferred over. It wasn't spread. It wasn't an issue that we've been talking about.
And did they do any other intervention in the microneedling group?
Well, they actually did 6 microneedling every 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So again, so they did it a number of different times.
So actually, that's probably more likely to be inflammatory, if anything.
You would think that again, if it didn't work or didn't transfer or have an increase in lesion counts after 6 treatments every 2 weeks, it's probably not going to happen.
Pretty aggressive.
They did have control as towards the isotretinoin group as well. Mm-hmm. They also then looked at it at 3 months post. And again, they still didn't see an increase in lesion counts.
Okay, so that's interesting, and so that's one data point, right?
Right.
But there are more. There are more data points than that, and so actually, we at Crown actually have looked at this very issue as well. We wanted to know, is this something we need to be concerned about? And so I don't know, Jose, if you have any of the studies up that we. But we did a couple of studies on this, and one was purely with microneedling, and the second one was with microneedling with a brand that we sell called Biojuve, which is C. acnes. Mm-hmm. It's a strain of C. acnes. It's a regimen that contains a live strain of C. acnes that is of the defendants subspecies, which is a very healthy associated strain. And we wanted to know, because we again, we've been dealing with this for over a decade, and this is something that's perpetuated, and we wanted to add to the amount of evidence that's out there. And so one of the things, is there any visuals up there?
Yeah, can you put on camera 8?
Okay, so this is the one, yes, okay, so go ahead and skip down to the photos here. So this, again, we'll put this citation in this was just published a few months ago. We'll put the citation into the description of the podcast. But here you can see, just go ahead and scroll down past these. You can see that these are acne-prone individuals because this study was looking at acne scarring.
Correct.
And so they kind of go hand in hand. These are younger individuals, and especially the young ladies, who have a lot of times when they're acne-prone, they have cycle-based hormonal acne. And you can see that, keep going, is there any more additionally here? There's one at the end, I think that's pretty good. Okay, so keep going. So you can see it's pretty much consistent here. Okay, right here is where I want to stop because I believe these individuals were in the group that was not using, it's all microneedling. So, but keep going. Yeah, okay, so these are as well. So really, this is where, we have a group that was just microneedling alone using just generic skincare. And you can see that they basically have very similar lesion counts and such to when they began. So it didn't exacerbate it. Keep going.
So the individuals in these pictures right here were on the traditional skincare, generic skincare plus Biojuve. Is that correct?
No, plus
Thomas?
microneedling treatment.
Plus microneedling.
Yes.
They all had microneedling.
Yes.
40 patients, 40 subjects, half of which were on generic skincare, half of which were on Biojuve. So I think it's important to point out which patients are which. But the bottom line is, in none of the 40 subjects was there a worsening of active acne.
I don't believe there was.
No, there was not. Now, I guess I'll throw out the question, have we ever found somebody that doesn't have acne or acne bacteria on their skin? Is there anybody, is it
that bubble boy in the 70s?
Okay, all right.
Didn't have C. acnes whatsoever?
I don't think they ever checked, but the thing was, he was one of is it skid babies? I think they're called skid babies? No. I can't remember. There's a name. There's a specific disease that you have an immune issue at birth, so they put you in a bubble. They've stopped doing it because there's therapies now. But those are the only, these germ-free animal models are really the only thing that is close to having nothing on their skin or in their bodies. It's debatable, though, if there's nothing.
Okay, so most likely is the case that everybody, or most everybody will do it most.
In a real-world scenario, yes.
Has acne bacteria on their skin.
C. acnes.
C. acnes, yes.
Not necessarily C. acnes.
Correct.
Though, right?
Right.
But again, so I know we're talking about this specifically, but also think about how many people have gone through microneedling. So the likelihood is that microneedling and the crossover to those that have C. acnes is pretty much almost everybody.
That's absolutely correct.
So,
and even if you've tried to sterilize the skin, you're going to have it because it lives in the bottom of the follicles.
All right. So we have a study that's clinically controlled.
Right.
We also have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of individuals that have had microneedling.
That's right.
Millions just with our own device.
Our millions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's not including other devices.
And again, we don't see a case in which
This would be everywhere.
Correct.
This would be everywhere.
That was going to be my
Very
point. I went the
prevalent, yeah.
long route about saying that.
Yeah.
But essentially, that's
I was
what
helping you
trying
out
to
there,
say.
Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. That's a really good point, actually, because even with our Skin Pen Precision, which is our FDA cleared device since 2018, just with that device alone, never mind our two devices before that, we've had over 3 million procedures done, and that's not including all the competitive device. These devices wouldn't have even grown in popularity over the last decade the way they have if they had been precipitating some type of acne.
Right.
Well, that being said, because that's correct. Your proposal there is correct that everybody, but keep in mind that we also know that certain strains are more associated with disease. So then the question becomes, well, for everybody who doesn't have those strains, it may be okay. But for those who have acne, who may have more pathogenic strains, do they have something that could be spread? Because I have heard people say, I don't think you should have somebody with active acne using microneedling, right? Mm-hmm. And so the question is that substantiated? Because now we're talking about a strain that may be associated with pathogenicity. But then we also have to say, well, is the strain associated only isolated to the follicles that get pimples? Or are they in all the follicles?
Right.
And it's very unlikely that they're isolated just to the pimples, because, how would that be the case? Now, I haven't tested everybody's follicles one by one to see if that's the case, but I do want to get into, do we have the other study by any chance? Because we did also a study just with people prone for acne, right? Yes.
Active.
Yeah, active acne. Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
First prone. But correct. For looking at, again, there is a contraindication on the IFU, the indication for use for skin pen for microneedling.
Right.
And with active acne. And the question was based on what we just talked about, the fact that it's been done on so many individuals. We had anecdotal information coming to us that said that it seemed to didn't cause issues regarding promoting acne. It had been well known regarding RF microneedling that though that's different, that it's actually improving acne. But in this case, just using microneedling, that we weren't seeing what was the issue that was put into the IFU about avoiding active acne. Now, again,
I don't believe active acne is a contraindication. I believe open lesions are a contraindication.
Correct.
It's a precaution for active acne.
It means it not having been studied is why it is
Correct.
a precaution and
Correct.
not a contraindication.
Right. So that's what I'm
just to be clear.
Right. So again, looking.
But now it has been.
So again, looking at that and the number of individuals that have had that done, again, looking that it doesn't. The two don't line up very well in regarding.
That's right.
As a true cause of concern.
Well, and I think it's worth, we're sitting here talking about something that's persisted in the market over the last years. It bubbles up every once in a while, but we just had a webinar with a very well-known dermatologist, Dr. Anna Perret, out of Atlanta, Georgia, and she has a wide experience with skin pen and now BioJuve. And this was not her professional opinion and the experience that she's had in her practice that she's seen any concern with spread of acne with either of those products. So it's important to understand that sometimes what surfaces in social media is not necessarily what is surfacing in the dermatological field.
Now, of course, this is a study that we did in our clinic, and just keep going to the before and afters. But one other thing is, you can read this too. The link will be in the description. You can take a look at this. But again, this was purely looking at microneedling in active acne patients and showing that it didn't exacerbate the acne. And so you can take a look at that yourself. But I just want really quickly, you can take it off the screen now. I just really quickly wanted to show you guys that there's multiple pieces of peer-reviewed literature out there, including ones that we had nothing to do with, that corroborate that this is not the case, that you can spread acne or that it exacerbates acne. But now let's go back and talk about, well, then what happened to that young lady?
Yeah.
What in the world happened? Because it looked like she was definitely having an issue. I mean, it was not a question.
Clearly.
There was an issue there, and it happened when she got microneedling. Mm-hmm. So what was it there, and was it acne? And so she gave us some clues. And so let's talk about the clues. The first one was that it didn't start until about a month afterwards. And that's, to me, a flag that goes off in my head, or alarm that goes off in my head that says that would not be acne. If it was going to be acne, it would happen much quicker. The reaction much quicker.
Almost immediate? You would expect it to be almost immediate?
I'm not sure about immediate, but it would be within weeks or within days. Yeah. The other thing that went off was, well, what is it that happens? Like, what is a delayed onset type of condition that happens? Like, is it an allergic reaction? Because no, allergic reactions typically happen quickly. So what is the type of, and in my mind, I think of foreign body reaction, because it takes a little bit of, there's a lot of times a delayed response to a foreign body. And so there's a type of foreign body reaction like called granulomas. And so can you go ahead and put the screenshots up there of what some case reports on granulomas. So this is one that was caused by microneedling. And so you can see here, she has demarcations, some red. Now, you don't really see any pustules per se. You see some papules there and some, it looks like a rash, which is what she described it at first. Is there any other pictures on this one, or is that it?
So this was back in, this was not the 2014 report.
No.
This was something different. But as early as 2014, and I think that's something that's not widely known either, but it came to light for us as a company that was distributing a microneedling device in the U.S. that
this is
here's
the one from 2014.
This was the first evidence we had as a company distributing a microneedling device that there is a concern, there is a risk of granulomas, particularly in these reports if you needle the wrong product in the skin.
Well, okay, let's backtrack and make sure we clarify that these images that we're looking at were not done because of microneedling solely. We have not to date, you guys can correct me if we're wrong, you can take that off. To date, we have not seen any evidence that microneedling alone can cause granuloma.
Correct.
I've
not seen anything.
Any reports
Dr.
that I've
Jones?
seen.
No, we could talk about the fact of the needles themselves causing a allergic reaction.
Sure. Well, that's separate. Yeah.
Correct. That's separate. But again, not alone.
Right. So the images that you just saw were because people needled in either a vitamin C serum or a hyaluronic acid serum. And those of you who know anything about me or Crown, the way that we do business is that we basically say not to use anything 24 hours post-treatment. And this is the reason why, because we're not saying vitamin C is bad. We're not saying anything's bad. We're saying the formulations are so variable and they're not formulated to be injected into live tissue.
Correct.
And when we've, in the many years that we've done this, the times that we see reactions are pretty much almost, I'd say 95%, because somebody needled something in.
Right. The skin is a great barrier,
Yep.
but unfortunately also the microneedling opens up that barrier so that those things that go in there that can cause an allergic reaction or cause an irritative reaction are able to penetrate and actually induce that response.
Right.
And so that's why we don't we don't recommend it. We don't position our products to that at that time as sort of doing it while the skin barrier is open as much as it is.
Yeah. And actually, to go back to your point earlier, we see these reactions sometimes with the topicals, but when you needle in and you have bacteria all over your skin and you have fungus all over your skin, we don't ever see issues.
Correct.
And so that's the funny part is that people are saying you can spread bacteria and such, but we don't see evidence of that. We never see evidence of that. It's always when they needle something in that's formula of some sort that shouldn't be needled in. So is there any more of the granuloma stuff, or that was it? Because there's a few publications.
And I think it's important to point out, too, granulomas is the extreme adverse reaction that you can get from needling in a topical that was not formulated to be needled or injected into the skin. But there's a lot of in between. Well, right, Dr. Jones? Right. I mean, you handle clinical affairs for us.
Before you talk, let's look at the image you had on the screen here. So here's the example of an additional example of granulomas. And this is microneedling as well, or no? Yes. Vitamin C serum.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, I just wanted to show that there's multiple peer-reviewed case reports that basically are corroborating that this is an issue. So, Brian, you were about to say?
Well, just talking, Angela asked about different levels. And so, again, you have things like folliculitis, and then you have the granulomas, which are much more, both are actually a immune response or inflammatory response. But again, just the level of concern certainly goes greater towards granulomas. But again, it's a case that, when these companies talk about they've done an RIPT, which is a repeat insult patch test, what they use for testing allergy and irritation for the product. They do that typically on intact skin. So
not typically, always.
Well, yeah, they can do it's called a Kliegman maximization study, and so they can rate it, but for the most part they don't. And so again, they're not testing it in the right way to see whether or not their product truly is
That's right.
A potential for irritation or allergy on microneedled skin. So that's
nor would the FDA allow them to get away with making a cosmetic that's needled into the skin.
Well, correct.
That's why they don't do it. So it makes
It's always
sense.
a safety study, in other words, and it's not even done well. I gave you an example just yesterday in your inbox, right, Dr. Jones?
You're right, and I was
Let's
gonna
not
respond.
speak to that.
Yes, we're not speaking to that, but an example of supposedly a study that was done with a topical being needled into the skin. But you're saying even looking at something like that, the study is actually not even set up to test safety.
Correct.
Much less are we actually
the numbers or anything
creating
else that go along
results
with
for
that.
those
So, yeah,
patients.
it's-
There's a lot going wrong there,
Correct.
in other words.
So finally, just to round out what Dr. Jones was saying earlier about if we have the one about the nickel allergies. So there is some evidence in the literature that certain metals, you can have allergic reactions to metals. And so to your point, it does matter which device you're using and what the content of the needles are. There are some things. So typically when you put in a medical device through the FDA, you have to do what's called biocompatibility and take each of the substances or the materials that is going to be patient facing and test them to see whether or not they cause an issue. And so unfortunately, not every company that is doing microneedling has gone through that process.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, and we would recommend you never use a product that has not gone through the FDA's 510K clearance process. But you can see that type of a rash, it's pretty much different than what you saw with the granulomas in the way that you can see the striations of the needle pattern. So it's very much a allergic reaction or a reaction in general to the needle itself and where the needle pierced, where the other one was more amorphous in it because it's basically the body forming reactions around a substance that's possibly. So if we go back to our young lady and the reaction that,
Can I make one point here,
Sure.
Thomas? Because Dr. Jones said something, I think, before we ever got on camera was it's not necessarily that the needles may contain it, because needles may contain a particular substance, but not necessarily leach a certain substance. Can you speak to that?
Right. So typically you're worried about nickel or chromium. It's towards
Okay.
those two metals. And stainless steel has both of those. But again, it depends on what grade of stainless steel, what can actually leach the nickel or the chromium out. So again, we use a particular level of stainless steel that actually doesn't promote the leaching of either chromium or nickel. And we had some individuals test the product that we didn't even know about and showed the fact that it didn't leach.
I believe they tested some,
and others did,
Yeah.
right. So, and that's been and that is actually published as well. And I guess
let's link that as
we can
well.
link that, yeah. So again, and that's where it goes into others that may be utilizing a cheaper stainless steel or not utilizing a stainless steel at all can have leaching of nickel. And some reports talk about nickel allergies as being the most prominent allergy in humans.
Right.
So again, it could be very high numbers of individuals that get responses from microneedling if they use the wrong needle.
Right.
So all stainless steel needles are not equal.
No, there's actually
It's-
numbers
Well,
of
let's not
different
get into a
stainless
sales pitch for microneedling here.
No, but I think it's important to understand that, there's differences, because this is actually a question, Dr. Jones, I've come to you a number of times over the last 10 years, and people want to know the makeup of our needles. And it's important, I think, to understand that
Right.
makeup not necessarily is the concern, it's whether they leach or not. That
Right,
is the
but
true
let's
concern.
steer that sentiment into the topic at hand, which is that can be a contributing factor. So if you're using a device that has a composition that would leach, that would be a contributing
concern.
factor. It also, if they're using a topical on top of that they shouldn't be using. And then if the person's predisposed, to inflammation, it could be a storm of things. But that's the point, is that acne is not a single factor that causes acne. Acne is multifactorial. There's several things that have to be in play for somebody to actually manifest acne. It's not about just spreading of a bacteria. That's not what's corroborated in the literature. Clinically, we haven't seen it. Commercially, we haven't seen it. There is no evidence, to my knowledge, in the literature that acne is communicable, and that this idea that you can spread active acne via opening a pimple there's no corroboration of that. But there is corroboration that microneedling over acne does not exacerbate acne. Several publications, including ones we've done ourselves. And so that's where I think the salient point here is that we need to rethink this sentiment And everybody that is listening, I challenge you to take a look at the publications that we have linked and that we've talked about. Go do your own research. Go look in the medical literature, because if you find something, we are the first people that want to know, because we don't want to do any harm to anybody, but also we don't want to necessarily propagate antiquated information. So we want to make sure that we're looking at all the information that we're looking at through the lens of what we know today.
So I think it's important to go back to our original patient. We started looking at a situation that was seen in social media, and we talked about all of the data that supports the fact that microneedling does not exacerbate nor spread acne. But going back to that patient, so what is that? Thomas, is that a case of granulomas, and what could have been done differently here?
Yeah, we can't definitively, again, I said we can't give a diagnosis because this is not somebody that's in our clinic. We don't know her medical history. We don't know everything that went on. I did contact the young lady, and I think she had gotten a lot of people contacting her because, I think it went over 1 million views or something.
She even said on the second video that she was just amazed by how much,
Yeah, but of course, everybody gave their opinions,
yeah.
And you could tell that sentiment that it was spreading of acne, somebody had given that to her because in her second video she mentioned it. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, we can't know exactly. But what we can say is, what does that look like? What was the telltale signs? It took a month to manifest. It took over a year to resolve. And now that is another sign that you tend to see with granulomas, is that they take a long time to resolve, which is one of the foreign body reactions. You might have heard the word granuloma from dermal fillers, because like particulate fillers, let's just stick with that. Dermal fillers, some dermal fillers have particulates and stuff. They can actually form what's called a granuloma, the same idea.
And define in layman's term what that is.
It's basically when the body sees a foreign substance and then sends a bunch of white blood cells and immune cells to get rid of it. And sometimes things can't be gotten rid of quickly, so they basically form a inflammatory wall around it, a nodule. And so it's actually one of the ways in which these particular fillers work, because the body tries to get rid of it, can't get rid of it, so builds a wall around it, scar tissue, and augments.
So it's a protection mechanism.
Yeah.
When something is a foreign body is introduced into the skin, which the skin is supposed to protect from, the body responds by walling off that substance to protect ultimately the
trying
skin
to get rid of it,
in the body.
Trying to destroy it.
Trying to destroy it.
Yeah.
But often
and then
they can't.
it manifests in appearance as red nodules that can take up to a year.
It can take a long time. A lot of times they'll inject anti-inflammatories like Kenalog or 5-FU or something to try to break it up or bring down the inflammation. It takes a lot of work. So if you have a person with a face full of granulomas, not only, if you watch that young lady's video, she's devastated.
Yeah, of course.
For a long, her mental health, I hate to think of what she went through.
Right.
The fact was, nobody believed her. She thought it was acne.
Yeah.
She's like, why can't you fix this? And because people just, they didn't know what it was, because she probably didn't have all the information of what caused it.
Right.
And so it's hard to make, and this is one of the problems in our industry, is that a lot of times people don't want to get in trouble, so they don't tell what they did that caused an issue. And so it's hard for us to know what to avoid. But that's why we're so adamant, and just don't put anything on. Just do microneedling. Don't put anything
alone.
on.
That is well proven since the 1990s.
Yeah.
Published medical literature showing that microneedling alone is going to get you the result that you want. There's no need to use anything else that would create risk for the patient.
The caveat there, or not the caveat, but the disclaimer there I want to say is that if a physician or somebody that is licensed to practice medicine chooses to take a pharmaceutical to needle it in, that's their discretion. That's a very different thing than taking something that's meant for topical use. If it's an injectable of some sort, that's their discretion. But unfortunately, that is not the majority of what's happening. The majority of what's happening is people that are not medical, do not have medical licenses, that are needling in topicals that are not meant to be inside of the skin. And that's what we're seeing, these granulomas, in the case reports. In all the times that we see complaints on our end, it's the same thing.
Right.
You know, this is actually the first time that I've thought about, I love that we brought up this, what does the science tell us? Because it's the first time that I've realized that the science, there's nothing in the science that reveals or supports that microneedling spreads acne But
There's
there
nothing.
is evidence in the science that microneedling in an inappropriate topical can cause granulomas.
Absolutely.
We
And
should be talking more about
So you have
that.
a positive control and you have a negative control.
Yeah.
Essentially, what you've done with microneedling. So
Yeah.
again,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
interesting the fact that, but the one that gets
But what
blamed is the negative, essentially the negative control, or
That's
the
right.
negative aspect, where the positive issue seems to be promoted by other companies.
And then what's interesting is that acne and granulomas to the untrained eye, or I shouldn't say untrained, but to some may appear similar. So then that makes the concern in this case, what we were just looking at potentially is,
Yeah, you're right. Because I actually, when I saw that video, I actually contacted a couple of really talented dermatologists and said, I want your opinion. What do you think this is? And none of them said acne.
yeah.
And that's key, that we have to be careful, not to jump to conclusions. We don't know everything about this case, nor are we going to say that we do. All I want to say is, that's a case where people jump to a conclusion. That's just one case. But for the years that we've done this, people have done that over and over, where they say that it happens when there's no evidence to it.
Correct.
And this is just one of those instances where it's like, we need to put this to bed. There's so much information out there that I would love to have anybody come and say, I have found evidence to this way, because we need to put this to bed.
Definitive answer.
Either we
Yeah.
need to stop saying this and stop promoting this talking point, or we need to show evidence that it actually should be a talking point. And that's kind of what the goal was today, is that there's no finger pointing or anything with this discussion. It's more about, shouldn't we be practicing medicine using actual medicine and science, and not speculation and antiquated sentiments? That's the only point here. Any last words, Dr. Jones?
No, I think that's kind of the whole story on this one.
And we're sticking to it.
And we're sticking to it.
All right. And Angela?
No, I'm inspired. I mean, as the head of education, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, we need a module for our own team
Sure.
to be able to understand, what does the literature tell us about the potential for microneedling in acne, which it does not spread, and then what does the literature tell us about the risk of granulomas
Sure.
with microneedling, and how do you separate those two topics?
Absolutely.
I'm inspired. I'm going to go home and get to work.
All right, absolutely. And I want to thank Jose, Seti, Alan, and Abigail in the back in the peanut gallery. Thank you. Abigail's in the corner. I guess she doesn't want to be on camera, but I don't know. Have we introduced Abigail before?
Hi, Abigail.
Is this her first podcast?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
Welcome.
All right. So the next one, we're going to actually
A
spend
wider
some time getting to
lens.
know her. But thank you all. We hope that you gleaned something from this discussion. And if they want to see us on social media, go ahead. Angela Wilson McDonald on Instagram. What was yours again? And he don't want you to look. All right. You can you can find me at dr.t.hitchcock on Instagram. If you really want to contact me, that's a good way to do it. Otherwise, you can go to crownlaboratories.com and visit our website there. And of course, we have social media there as well. But from all of us here at Crown Labs, we thank you for joining us, and goodbye for now.